The following podcast is a production of Cityview Church in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
The following program is not ashamed of the gospel and is about to tell you the truth.
Some kids don't have their dad or their moms there that can help them.
As a mom, I was feeling very vulnerable and scared.
Growing up with my mom, single mom, so she always had to work. It was just not a lot of family time.
These young kids, there's so much in the streets right now that if they don't have positive role models or someone to tell them right from wrong, it's so easy for them to go down the wrong road.
My father was around older people all of the time. He was born to a very young mother. She was 13 when she had him. And so his grandfather raised him, and he learned a lot through his grandfather. And he passed it on to me, to get around older people, learn from older people.
Life matters, and the issues in life matter because they affect how we live our lives. In this podcast, Pastor Walt McFadden thinks out loud about truth and discerns how it is being applied to everyday life. Thinking Out Loud podcast is a production of Cityview Church in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Brandon Porter, you are the new associate pastor at Cityview Church.
Yes, sir.
Which is something you've been doing for a while, but not full time. You've been around the church how long?
Yeah, I've been going to Cityview for about 7 years.
And what makes you want to be a pastor? What got into your head or into your heart that, hey, this would be a good thing to do?
It really, I think, is just the call, the answering of the call. Never wanted to be a pastor. I went to seminary and didn't want to be a pastor. God has brought me full circle. And when Walt gave me the call, everything inside of me said, you need to answer that call. I went and prayed, and everything inside of me said, you need to answer the call. And so answer the call, just to be faithful with with what God has given me, tools that he's given me, the gifts and the abilities and talents that he's given me, the mentorship that he's given me, and just to be faithful to that.
You know, that'd be a great book title, by the way. Did you know that? I've never wanted to be a pastor.
Yeah, that might sell some.
It would probably sell, simply because I think it's an honest kind of assessment. You know, sometimes we end up doing things we didn't think we ever would do, and yet here we're doing them. So recently you had a sermon that you were assigned by our senior pastor, Titus chapter 2, verses 3 through 5, talked there about godliness and respect. And it was godliness and respect, not just overall, but really kind of godliness and respect for older people. And you've had that. You're a young man, but you have some kind of a propensity to the older folks. Why is that?
You know, I think my father was around older people all of the time. He was born to a very young mother. She was 13 when she had him. And so his grandfather raised him, and he learned a lot through his grandfather. And he passed it on to me, to get around older people, learn from older people. And so when I was younger, and even before I was a believer, we were going to church, and the church was full of older people. And as I grew older, I started to realize what I was gaining from the older people. I also started to look around and see that my peers, my same age, were really foolish, and I didn't want to be like that. They were doing things that I knew was foolish. And so as I've grown in my life, God has given me the opportunity to be around older people and to see the wisdom that is in older people. And so that's where I get that point of view, I think.
It's wise to be able to look to people beyond you and to learn from them. Not that you're going to do it just like them, but at least you learn some of the things that they have learned. But in the sermon, you're talking about truth, and you're also talking about godliness is connected to truth. And knowing the truth actually, then, you said, changes behavior. Do you really believe that?
I do.
Why?
I really do. Well, it's simple and it's not simple, right? Because you can know something and not believe it, and your behavior doesn't change. But when you know something and you believe something, you have to act in accordance with what you believe. We see that often in life when we teach children things, right? They know something and they believe that it's true. If I know, like my daughter, if she knows that I said, do not do this, and she believes that what I'm saying is true, that if you do this, you will get a spanking, right? It changes the way she operates because she knows the truth and she believes the truth, right? And so I think that is a way to help explain it. But even more so, I think when we think about on a big gospel level, right, which is what we're really going after here, we are people who are to tell the truth to captives, people who are held captive by darkness. And so when you go and you think about, so Juneteenth this year just became a national holiday, right?
Right.
And so that was when soldiers were going down, messengers going down to Galveston to tell these last slaves that you are actually free. And so as they get down there and they tell a captive, you're free. Now that the captive knows the truth, right? This is metaphorical for believers, right? And in the outside world, now that the captive knows the truth, how is that captive going to respond? Right? He's going to go to Master John and say, Master John, take my chains off? No, he's not going to go to Master John anymore because that's not his master. And he knows that. He may go to him and say, John, take off my chains. I'm a free man.
Yeah.
Is he going to stay on the plantation? No. He's free.
Yet so often, and you know this to be true since you work in the church, that sometimes people say they believe certain things, but it doesn't change their behavior. That's where a lot of times people say, well, we use that term backslidden, or we use that term, well, we're lukewarm. How does that work? I mean, we know the truth, we hear the truth, we even say we're Christians, but it hasn't changed our behavior. Where's the disconnect?
You know, it's going to sound hard and harsh, but I think that you don't know the truth. That's what the scriptures tell us, right? In the very first verse of Titus 1, Paul is saying, he's talking about this truth that accords with godliness, right? There's a truth that accords with godliness. You know this truth, godliness then follows. So I think there is a disconnect because maybe we don't believe it, or maybe some of us are sitting in churches where we're not really hearing the truth, right? Our behavior is going to paint a picture of the gospel, right? So when we look at what we're painting, if our lenses are off, if our lenses of the gospel, if our lenses of the truth aren't really the gospel, then the result of the painting is going to be something different from what the gospel is.
Well, you had mentioned that older people, because that passage has to do in Titus chapter 2, coming back to the passage you used. You mentioned that older people were to be mentors of younger women, to teach them about how faith affects life overall in general. It sounded like to me that our job as spiritual people need to always be concerned about the future generations as it concerns how to live for God. You said that what we have learned and experienced with God is always what we transfer to the next generation. That reminds me that throughout scriptures, they teach the next generation. That's what the Hebrew scriptures, to pass it along to the next generation. So it is very important for older generations to know the truth because they're going to pass it on to the next generation. What happens if the older generation doesn't know the truth? Because we have churches all over the United States that are gray-haired and they are dying, and the truth isn't being passed on. So this tradition that we consider the next generation is so important. Did they forget the next generation? What happened?
Well, I think there's two issues there. Is there a forgetting of the next generation, and is there a truth being taught to the older generation? Do they have the truth? When we're talking about if they have the truth and they forget the next generation, there is a huge disconnect there. And there's a problem because the next generation doesn't know what it looks like to live out the truth. They may look through the scriptures, but they're looking up to see who else is living like this. And oftentimes when you have young people, they try to live out the truth as best as they can amongst each other. But it's better to see older people who have lived out the truth, who are living out the truth, who have a history of living out the truth, to have an example. When we talk about them not having the truth, the older generation, then that's exactly what they're going to pass down. They're going to pass down something that is not real, something that is not true, something that doesn't change your life according to the way the scriptures explain it should be changed.
So older people need to be aware that they're being watched.
Oh, absolutely.
And that their faith isn't just something that's stale or was alive 20, 30 years ago, but it's alive today, and they're preaching a message every time they come to church if young people are around and they're watching them, right? And that's something that doesn't always happen. Sometimes older people think, well, that I'm over this. I'll just go to church and sit and listen. But they really need to be actively producing or portraying faith for the next generation to say, hey, when you get to be 50 or 60 years old, you don't just spiritually die. You should be at your very best to turn around and share with what you have learned to the next generation. I'm not sure I've seen that in my experience in the church as much as I probably should have.
Yeah, I think that's a huge problem that we have in our church, in the American church. I can't speak to other churches because I don't live in those contexts.
Right.
But I know here we struggle with that. And part of it has to do with our culture. Our culture, one, says that when people get older, we're done with them. We don't have anything. They can't contribute to us anymore. And so we kind of push them off and shuffle them off to the side.
Yes.
And so what is an older person to do when they're responding according to the cultural value? If you're responding according to the cultural value, you'll say, well, then I don't have anything to share. I'm not going to share anything. You don't think I'm valuable? Then fine. I'm just going to do what I think is best for me. Right? And so you have those two things working together, which actually pit the younger versus the older, which is not what we need at all.
I went to a concert recently with my wife. It was an Eagles concert. I noticed that most of the Eagles members are well into their 70s, and they play their music well. I mean, they've been playing it for 50 years, right? So they should know it fairly well. And they did. They did it extremely well, even at 75 years old. But what was really interesting is I noticed that all around them, they had younger people doing video and all kinds of lighting things. And I know it wasn't them, obviously. It was the younger generation enhancing the music of the old people. It was just a beautiful portrayal of how older people and younger people in the church can work together. I just thought, that's a great illustration. You're big on mentoring, and I'm not sure why, but you're big on mentoring, and that's kind of what you were talking about. Older women mentor the younger women. Why is mentoring so important to you?
Yeah, kind of like what I said before, there has to be some example of what godly living looks like, right? And we use all types of things as mentors when we don't even realize it, right? So one thing that we talk about in teaching, when we talk about a mentor text, right? So you have a mentor text that students can compare to and look and see, this is what is happening, this is the way it's supposed to be done, right? And then you go off and you do your own type of thing, right? We are being mentored by all sorts of things all of the time. And so it's important for godly mentorship to happen, one-on-one mentorship to happen, or 1 in 3 or 1 in 4, the way that Jesus did, because those godly aspects of life and those godly aspects of our point of view and our worldview, all of that needs to be shown as an example to those who are younger in faith, younger in age in general, in order for them to be able to see that exact way that godly living is supposed to be lived out.
But you also made an interesting comment about the dark times in life, and that we can mentor not only the things that work, but also mentor the things that didn't work. And to be able to say, well, this happened to me, yet God rescued me. And that's also important, isn't it?
That's absolutely important, right? That's what Psalm 145 is talking about. When David is saying the older generations will share the mighty works of God with the next generation. The mighty works of God don't just happen in a vacuum, right? We need rescuing as a people. We continue to do it over and over and over, and we do it wrong over and over and over. And who's there to rescue us? The one true God. He comes and he rescues us. Now, if I am mentoring somebody and all they ever hear about are the good things where I don't need God, right? It seems as if I don't need God. Things are great. Things are good. Then why do I need to live a godly life according to the way that God has me to live it? But when I hear about the times that God has rescued you from the darkest place that you've gotten yourself in, I can see that God is a rescuer. If I hear about the times where you are broken and hurt, and you tell me about that and how God has rescued, then I can see that God is a healer, right? If I hear about the times where you didn't have what you needed and God was a provider, I can see that God is a provider, right? We have to give the whole picture of the gospel, right? Yes, we have eternal life in Christ, and that is great, but we have to remember we were rescued from something. We were rescued from something. And so we have to paint that whole picture that God is gracious, that He rescued us from our sin. He rescued us from our evil, right? And He washed us and He cleansed us, right? And He made us His own possession, and a people who are zealous for good works. Right? That's what the text in Titus tells us. And so we have to paint the picture of the gospel completely.
I love that word rescue. It gives you another kind of, a different picture of God reaching down. Sometimes save doesn't always have that same feel to it, but rescue does. Well, in the end, you said that our lives become what we believe. If our values and principles all stem from a single source of what we believe, we spend time at how we steward our money, how we practice self-control. They all stem from what we believe. So you made a point to say that the heart will follow the head and what the head is thinking. So tell us more about how this works in the mentoring process. So tell us how that works.
Yeah, I think that when we talk about the person who is doing the mentoring, right, there needs to be, Paul says, follow me as I follow Christ.
Okay.
Right? We think about it, especially in this context of Titus, on this Grecian island of Crete. And a lot of scholars believe that the Cretans believe that this is the birthplace of Zeus.
Sure.
This is the birthplace
Greek
of
mythology.
Greek mythology.
Wow.
So this is the birthplace of Zeus, right? Yeah. So Zeus holds a very special place in the heart of the Cretan people, right? And his character, they would brag about, right? He was a liar. He was a deceitful god. They believed that he was a man and then became a god, that he was deceitful and he would lie to sleep with women, and he would be doing all kind of crazy tricks. And so they kind of bragged about this. So to me, when I read this text, it makes sense to me that these are the issues that they're having in this church on Crete. These churches on Crete, these people are popping up, right? Because this is what has been leading them. This is what they believed for so long, right? And now they're getting pulled into something different. They have to fight that. So when we think about the mentor, what does the mentor believe about God? It has to be the truth. You have to believe the truth and share the truth, because what you believe is what you're going to pass on when you're in an active discipleship relationship. Whether you think you're going to or not, what you believe is going to come forth. And it's going to maybe not always be received by the one you're mentoring, but somewhere, they're going to get some exposure to this belief. By the grace of God, they may be protected from what is false, right? And so the important thing is know the truth, study the truth, have these experiences with God, know and recount those to those people that you're mentoring and discipling.
You know, pastoring is a big responsibility. Sometimes pastors get more, they have more responsibility than they should. And yet, we all are supposed to be pastoring one another. That's another form of mentoring. We're mentoring each other, older to the younger. We're trying to get people to follow Jesus and the example that the Scriptures tell us how to follow. And so sometimes I think we put too much pressure on the pastors to be the only leader or the spiritual voice. And yet, I think that's unfair to them. I think that we have the body ministry, and that body ministry is constantly in motion. That is mentoring from one to the other to the other. So everyone has a part of the ministry. It's just not the pulpit, right or wrong?
That is absolutely correct. That's absolutely correct. Here's the thing, right? When we go back to Ephesians and we see what the purpose of the shepherd is, right? This is to train and equip the saints for the work of the ministry. What is the work of the ministry? Make disciples. That is the whole thing, right? Make disciples and teach them about what Jesus said and what he did and about the grace, the gospel of grace. Teach them. The pastors, obviously, they do that on their own level, right? There should be some discipleship. There should be, all of the things that Christians are called to do, right? But they're equipping and building up the saints so they can do the bulk of the discipleship.
And we learn from each other, and we're constantly learning.
Yes.
I've been a Christian 50 years. I'm constantly learning. I'm learning from you, you're 20, 30 years my younger. But I'm learning. I'm learning how you think. I'm learning how you see things, and it gives me a fresh perspective from where I have been. So, and this is what we have to get the church to think about,
yes.
that everybody has something to contribute to each other.
Yes.
Constantly moving that discipleship mentoring issue from, around, so that we're a living body, a living organism.
Absolutely.
Not just one person preaching at us
Right.
every Sunday
Right.
on, at the pulpit. Well, in concluding our conversation, Brandon, today, you were very strong in your message about how culture does not care about our families. And you have a young family, so this is really sensitive to you. But you made the point to say that is why that our families must remain strong against the culture, and that begins with the having a strong home. But in order to push back the culture, you're going to have some strength and some courage to be able to do that. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think this all goes back to the gospel, right? And it goes back to the way God created things, right? He created Adam, and then he created Eve, right? And they were to be together. And then they were to essentially make disciples, right? They were supposed to be fruitful and multiply, right? And multiply what? Just more people? No, they were supposed to bring forth the image of God, right? To be all over the earth. And so then we move fast forward to this gospel situation, right? Where we have Jesus, and then he has the body, and the body is supposed to go out and set captives free. Right? And bring more people into the kingdom of God. And by doing that, right, just continuing to litter the earth with the image of God, right? And so that's where our families are supposed to be based in. We can't wait for the culture to tell us how we're supposed to do what God is telling us to do. We have to be willing to do what God is telling us to do, right? And so we have to stand firm in the conviction that God has put forth for us, right? We have to stand firm in that. We have to protect our families and not be influenced by culture to the point where we're not doing what God has called for us to do. We have to protect our homes because the culture is assaulting the home. It says that the man is worth nothing, right? And that the women should rise to power. It doesn't sound, that's not what they're saying exactly, right? But that's what's coming out, that the children are really worth nothing and you can take them out at any time as long as it's before they're born. I mean, we can just continue to go on. There's other things they're saying that they want to break apart the family, and there's another way to do it. We see what happens when the father is not in the home. We keep talking about, fatherlessness, but for whatever reason, we don't actually see that as a real problem. But not everybody does. Many people do. But many people I know, and you can look anywhere, have father issues because they either had a weak father, a father who is not present, a father who is there but not present. I mean, the list can go on and on and on and on. And there are problems that are being produced because the way our culture looks at our families. We need to have strong families. They're the foundation of society. And all of this is reflective of the household of God.
Well, Brandon, it has been good talking with you. And this whole idea of mentorship and godliness changes behavior. And that behavior is something we can mentor each other in, whether it's behavior as we address culture or in our families. I mean, we're constantly mentoring each other. That's why church is important. You can watch church on Zoom all you want, but But the mentoring process takes place eyeball to eyeball, skin to skin, in presence. And so I'm thankful for that. So, well, thank you. Next time we'll talk again. You're going to be preaching in another couple of weeks, and we'll talk again. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Larry.
There are almost 400,000 churches in America, so there are many choices. So what is your criteria for attending church?
And I fear that some of you started coming to this church because you wanted a happy family. You wanted a happy marriage. You wanted happy kids. You wanted a good family relationship. And you realized, I think God could grant me that. So let me go to church and ask Him for that. But my concern is this. If that's your motivation for following God, then really God has become a means to an end for you. Well, then suddenly God just becomes someone you use in this means to an end rather than believing that God is the end Himself.
Well, Cityview is a church in the city for the city. Our services focus on worship, prayer, and providing you with the truth from God's Word. There's no spin when it comes to telling you the truth about life and how to live it according to God's plan. Cityview Church, located at 3041 4th Avenue South in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Our Sunday service begins at 10:30 a.m.
This podcast is listener supported. Please consider how you can help by going to our website at cvcmpls.org.